So our resource group is starting to get a number of resources in it, and let's start to remove some of them. I'll show you how to delete resources. Now within a virtual machine, there is a delete button, but deleting your virtual machine really only deletes the virtual machine element and not the IP address, not the network security group and other aspects that were created. So there is a delete button within the virtual machine. The reason we created this in its own resource group is because you can then delete the entire resource group, and deleting the resource group will delete all of the resources inside of it. Now in this instance, with two virtual machines in this resource group, I'm going to leave the resource group alone, but I'm only going to delete the virtual machines and stuff that is inside of it. So I've selected all of the items. Now I think I will keep the virtual network. There's no reason to delete it. It doesn't cost me anything to have one. And the next time I create a virtual machine, I can just install it there. So I've selected 10 out of the 11 items, and I can go up here to the delete button, and I just have to type YES, and it will permanently delete all of these resources. They are non-recoverable, including disks and network interface cards. Now, the reason I'm deleting this is because we're going to talk about automation, particularly ARM templates in this video. So let's go through the process of creating another virtual machine. I'm going to go over here, Windows Server 2016. We're going to put that into our existing resource group, and we have to give it a name. So AZ SGD new VM3, and I'm going to choose the smaller B1MS is my favorite. Okay, I'm not going to do anything about availability just yet. I have to give it the user ID and password. And we're just going to accept all the default settings, and we're going to go right to the review screen. Okay, so we didn't have to go through all of those things. Now, we mentioned before that the template is available for download. Let's take a look at what that means. So, clicking on Download Template, it takes me to this template screen. Now, I haven't created the virtual machine yet, but I can see what Microsoft Azure is going to do in order to create it. Okay. Now, there are three components to this template. There's the template itself, which is this JSON file. Now, if we were to go through, in this video and the next video, we'll talk about the different components of this template. But we can see that there are a number of resources that are covered in here. I'm going to minimize this. We've got a network interface card, network security group, public IP address, a virtual machine, and a storage account for diagnostics, because I didn't turn off diagnostics. Okay, so there are 5 resources being created by this template, and so we should be able to look at the JSON file under the resources section, and we will see all of the different resources. So that's in one of the network interface cards. We scroll a little bit, network security group. Scroll a little bit more, there's a virtual machine settings. Now, when we look at the details of what's being configured here in terms of creating this template, you'll see that it actually refers to parameters. So it's not actually hard-coded what the settings are. Okay, even though these are the 5 resources, the settings are going to come in from external sides. Okay, even the OS disk is a parameter, for instance. Okay, although the type of operating system is not. Scrolling down some more, we've got our storage account. Okay, those are the 5 resources. So that's just one of the 3 components here, is the template. Now the parameters. The parameters is also a JSON file. And this is basically what I've entered into the portal. I chose the central US location. A network interface card was automatically assigned for me. Scrolling down a little bit, the virtual machine name I entered, etc. Okay, so the parameters in the template are kept separate. Now, in order to deploy this, I would use a script such as this PowerShell script. You'll see that it takes in 2 files, a template JSON and parameters JSON, And if we scroll down, we're going to see that it basically creates a new resource group, and then it's going to do a deployment. So a new Azure RM resource group deployment based on the template and based on the parameters. That's basically what it's doing. So it's got the template file, the parameters file, and then a script in order to take those files and execute them. So we can basically download this. There's a download button, and we can basically, for the template parameters and the scripts, download them, and then we can modify them. So on our local machine, we can go through and say, you know what, I want to deploy this into Eastern US. I want to deploy this into Western Europe. I want to deploy this into Canada. Just change the location, and it will. We can redeploy it. Now we will have to not only change the location, but the name of the network interface card. We'll have to change the public IP address name, because obviously that's going to need to be unique depending on where we deploy this. But if we wanted to deploy this in multiple places with changing of 3 or 4 variables, we should be able to do that. The other thing we can do is we can add this to the template library. So we can give this a name, and we can say that this is our preferred developer desktop, for instance, and save that as a template to the library. So we can see that Azure templates are basically a flexible way of doing automation. You can check this code into your source control, into GitHub, or into whatever you use for your source control repository, and you will have a snapshot of your environment that's reproducible. So all of these things that you're doing within the portal can get described as JSON templates. And so one of the advantages is this becomes things that can be reproduced. There's also a thing called dynamic state configuration, DSC. It's more of an operations task, but keeping your production environment in a constant known state and avoiding what's called drift, right? Configuration drift, where somebody goes in, changes a setting, doesn't tell anyone, doesn't document it. That kind of stuff happens in production networks. And so using dynamic state configuration, which is done using ARM templates, is another way of protecting your production environment. So this is how you would get the template for an ARM template that you've, a virtual machine that you've created using the portal. We're going to download this, and we're going to use this as a way to do some modifications to this. So we're not actually going to even deploy what we've done. We're just going to download it, and then we're going to go into this template and edit it.